All right, so are you ready to jump into some seriously mind-bending territory?
Always up for a good mental workout.
Okay, good, because today we're going to be unpacking that crazy conversation between Elon Musk and Joe Rogan.
Ah, yes, from the Joe Rogan experience.
Yeah, episode number 2223 to be exact.
I remember that one. Quite the whirlwind.
It was like a total roller coaster of opinions and hot takes on, well, basically everything.
Everything from climate change and what we eat to AI, free speech.
Oh, and of course those classic Musk on Rogan tangents.
Gotta love those. The Diddy conversation comes to mind.
Oh yeah, for sure. But we're not here to just rehash the headlines or anything.
Right, we're going deeper, like a proper deep dive.
Exactly. We're going to be dissecting Musk's arguments, exploring all the implications, so you walk away with more than just memes.
Give the listeners something to really chew on.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So, what makes this conversation so interesting, right?
Well, I think it's because Musk just doesn't shy away from controversy.
Yeah, totally.
He throws out some really hot takes, and, I mean, whether you agree with him or not,
It definitely gets you thinking.
forces you to confront your own assumptions and biases.
Totally. It's like right off the bat, he jumps into the whole climate change debate,
Okay.
but with a twist.
A twist?
He comes out and says that, cutting back on meat.
Like becoming vegetarian or vegan.
Exactly.
Yeah.
He claims that it actually has zero measurable impact on, combating climate change.
Interesting. So he's not buying into that whole individual action approach?
No, not at all. He basically says it's a distraction
Yeah.
from, the larger systemic changes that are actually needed.
So he's pushing for a more systems level approach.
Exactly. And, that kind of perspective, it directly challenges what a lot of climate activists are advocating for.
Right. They tend to focus on individual choices.
Yeah, like using less plastic, driving less.
So if our individual choices are basically irrelevant in Musk's view,
Then where do we even begin to make a real difference?
what kind of systemic shifts are we talking about here?
Yeah, big questions. And things get even, I don't know, wilder.
Wilder how?
When we get to the whole Twitter takeover, which, as we all know, is now called X.
Right, right. Can't forget about the rebrand.
But anyway, he frames this whole acquisition as a mission to save free speech.
A valiant crusade in his eyes.
Exactly. And his main claim is that Twitter was actively suppressing certain narratives.
Then censoring information.
Yeah. He even specifically mentions, Trump getting deplatformed and how the whole Hunter Biden laptop story was handled.
He brings those up a lot as evidence.
Right. He uses them as proof that there's this hidden agenda at play to control the narrative,
So in Musk's view, platforms like Twitter,
or X.
right, X, they've become these incredibly powerful gatekeepers of information.
And their decisions about what content they allow or remove.
He's saying they have a huge impact on public discourse.
Totally.
Yeah.
Shaping our perceptions,
Yes.
potentially even influencing elections.
Which is a pretty scary thought, if you think about it.
Right. It's who gets to decide what we see and hear?
And whether we agree with his assessment or not, it's a conversation we need to be having. It's too important to ignore.
Totally. And then it gets even more heated when he starts talking about what he calls the woke left.
Okay, this is where things get interesting.
He full-on claims that they were about to take over Twitter completely.
Which in his eyes was a massive threat.
To free speech, to democracy itself.
He doesn't hold back, does he?
No, he really goes after the Democratic Party, accusing them of intentionally using illegal immigration to sway elections in their favor.
Oh, he's saying they're manipulating the system for political gain.
Exactly. And he cites specific data about the rise of illegal immigration into swing states.
Swing states being those that could go either way in an election.
Yep. And he argues that this directly benefits the Democratic Party. And that it could lead to a permanent shift in the, political landscape, towards a one-party state.
So essentially, he's worried about the erosion of the two-party system.
Exactly. That's his, core concern.
And regardless of where you stand politically, these are serious accusations.
It's important to look at the evidence he's presenting, have those open, informed discussions.
Yeah.
About the potential impact on our democracy. Because, he doesn't stop there. He also goes on to call out California and other states for not having voter ID requirements.
Okay.
And he claims it's straight up cheating, a deliberate attempt to manipulate elections.
Strong words.
Yeah. But it's interesting because even though he comes across as very anti-woke, left.
He's also advocating for more open dialogue.
Yeah, exactly. He's framing censorship as a major threat to democracy,
Right.
and he was literally willing to put his billions where his mouth is to fight against it.
So, love him or hate him, there's no denying that his acquisition of Twitter, or X now, is a pivotal moment in how we think about online platforms
Mm,
and their impact on society.
totally. And he doesn't just stop at, Twitter or X or whatever we're calling it these days. He also takes aim at how the whole COVID-19 pandemic was handled.
Yeah.
And he has some pretty strong criticisms of Dr. Fauci.
Oh, that should be good.
He questions Fauci's involvement in gain-of-function research, and he criticizes the whole push for vaccine mandates. He even shares personal anecdotes about friends who have experienced, negative side effects from vaccines.
So, just for context, gain-of-function research,
Yeah.
it's a pretty controversial area of study. Basically, it involves modifying viruses to understand their potential to cause pandemics.
Right, and Musk is skeptical about it.
Yeah.
And his criticism of those vaccine mandates, it kind of points to a broader distrust
Right.
of authority figures and institutions.
Especially when it comes to healthcare and science.
But it's important to note that he doesn't really come across as anti-vaccine.
Oh, okay.
He clarifies that he generally supports vaccinations. His main concern seems to be about transparency, or the lack thereof, and the potential for conflicts of interest within, organizations like Big Pharma.
So it's more about questioning the motives and the methods.
Yeah, exactly. He's not saying vaccines are bad, but he's definitely raising some red flags.
Which, ties back into that recurring theme we've been seeing.
Oh,
This desire for more individual autonomy, a skepticism towards those centralized power structures, and a strong belief in the importance of questioning narratives. Even those presented as, like, established scientific fact.
It's like he's constantly pushing us to think critically, to question everything.
And speaking of questioning things,
Oh, let's talk about drugs.
this should be interesting.
Yeah, this part of the conversation was actually surprisingly insightful, at least for me.
Yeah. Tell me more.
Okay, so Musk and Rogan, they really get into the weeds on drug legalization and addiction,
Okay.
discuss their own experiences, and they challenge those conventional views on, like, what we consider good drugs versus bad drugs.
It's where that libertarian philosophy of Musk's really comes through. He believes individuals should have the freedom to choose what they put into their own bodies.
Yeah, he talks about how the government should only intervene to, like, ensure public safety and prevent harm to others. But otherwise, it's your choice.
Makes sense.
And they talk about fentanyl, and how dangerous it is. But then they also delve into the potential benefits of things like MDMA and psilocybin therapy.
So they're acknowledging that some drugs can have therapeutic uses.
Exactly. And they call out the hypocrisy of, legalizing things like alcohol and opioids.
Which are both incredibly addictive and harmful.
Right. But then we ban other substances that might actually have some potential for good.
It really forces you to confront those preconceived notions about drugs and addiction.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
It's like, are we really basing our drug policies on science and reason? Or are we just clinging to outdated moral judgments?
Big question.
And just when you think you've got a grasp on Musk's worldview, he throws this totally unexpected curveball. It's become known as, like, the squirrel incident.
The squirrel incident.
Yeah, he goes on this rant about how a man's pet squirrel was euthanized by government officials. It seems totally random at first, right?
Get that out of left field, yeah.
But he ties it back to this larger point about, government overreach.
And intrusion into personal freedoms, it's a classic libertarian concern.
Exactly. This seemingly bizarre anecdote actually speaks volumes about a core principle of his philosophy.
Which is?
A deep-seated belief in individual liberty and a profound distrust of government authority. It demonstrates how deeply these values inform his thinking, even on seemingly unrelated topics. Like, it's a good illustration of how his mind works.
It makes sense. It shows how those core beliefs really permeate his entire worldview.
Right. It's like 1 minute he's talking about building rockets and sending people to Mars. The next he's passionately defending the rights of a pet squirrel.
Gotta admire the consistency, I guess.
It's true. You really can't make this stuff up. But somehow it all circles back to those core beliefs.
It's fascinating.
It is, right?
It is. And before we move on to Tesla phones and the future of AI and all that, maybe we should pause for a second.
Okay.
What are your, initial takeaways from this part of the conversation?
Yeah. What surprised you the most? What's resonating with you? We've got a lot more to unpack, so stay tuned for part 2 of this deep dive.
It definitely is a conversation that, leaves you thinking. But before we get too lost in, robot overlords and squirrel conspiracies,
Right.
we should probably circle back to something a bit more immediate.
Like what?
Musk's views on the 2024 election
Hmm.
and the state of American democracy. He paints a, well, let's just say a pretty stark picture.
He doesn't really sugarcoat things, that's for sure.
Yeah.
He claims this election is like a make or break moment
Oh.
for the country.
High stakes.
Yeah, he flat out says that if Trump doesn't win, it could be the last, like, truly fair election America ever sees.
Wow.
He seems genuinely convinced that the Democrats are going to rig the system.
And his main argument centers around immigration.
Exactly. He believes the Democratic Party is deliberately manipulating immigration policies for, political gain.
Okay, I'm listening.
So he highlights this like increasing use of an app that was initially designed for tracking legal migrants. But now it's being used to schedule illegal border crossings
Wait, really?
and even facilitate flights for undocumented immigrants into swing states.
That's interesting.
Yeah. And his claim is that they're essentially giving these immigrants more benefits than American citizens, like effectively buying their votes to secure a permanent Democratic majority.
It sounds a bit, I don't know.
Out there.
Yeah, a bit.
I know. But he insists that anyone can, like, verify this information just by looking at the data on government websites.
Regardless of whether those claims are, convincing or not.
It's definitely something to think about.
It's crucial to consider the implications. Even if they're unsubstantiated, these types of accusations can really erode public trust in our democratic institutions and fuel, further division and polarization.
Yeah, it's like, even if it's not true, just saying it can do a lot of damage.
Exactly. Words have power.
And he also brings up the whole, like, woke ideology again,
Right.
arguing that it's a threat to, individual liberty and meritocracy. He believes that this focus on, like, identity politics and social justice, it's stifling open debate.
Creating a culture of censorship.
Exactly. And he uses this really, like, striking analogy.
Yeah.
He compares the current political climate to, get this, the Salem witch trials.
Wow. Okay. That's a pretty bold comparison.
Right. He argues that anyone who dares to challenge the prevailing narrative.
They get labeled a heretic, ostracized, just like those accused of witchcraft, centuries ago.
Exactly.
It's definitely a provocative comparison, but it does highlight the potential dangers of groupthink.
Right. And the importance of, critical thinking.
Not just blindly accepting what you're told.
Right. Musk seems to be urging us to, like, resist conforming to popular opinion.
Yeah.
To constantly question the narratives that are presented
They
to
won't,
us.
even when they come from sources we trust. Yeah.
Even then. And then he turns his attention to the mainstream media,
Okay.
accusing them of being, like, a mouthpiece for the Democratic Party, pushing a biased agenda.
This is a common critique, of course, but I'm curious to hear his take on it.
He brings up examples like, how the media constantly repeated the phrase sharp as a tack to describe Biden before the debates,
Right.
even though, like, his cognitive decline was pretty evident to anyone watching.
And regardless of your political leanings,
Yeah.
Musk's critique of media bias is not a new argument. But it's interesting to consider it in the context of this conversation. He seems to believe that the media plays a significant role in shaping public perception and influencing elections. And he sees, like, biased reporting as a direct threat to democracy.
And he even goes so far as to say that journalists are, like, pressured into conforming to a specific narrative, afraid of losing their jobs or being blacklisted.
If they step out of line, express dissenting views.
Yeah, he makes it sound like the freedom of the press is under attack, not just from, external forces like government censorship.
But from within the media establishment itself.
Yeah, exactly.
It definitely raises questions about the role of journalism in a healthy democracy.
Right. Like, ideally, the media should be a watchdog, holding those in power accountable.
Providing the public with objective information.
Yeah. But what happens when the media becomes too intertwined with political interests?
Then its ability to do that, to be that watchdog, it gets compromised.
And that's where Musk believes platforms like X come in.
As an alternative.
Yeah, like a necessary counterbalance to the mainstream media.
A space for open dialogue, diverse perspectives.
He argues that X has already made a positive impact on free speech, forcing other social media platforms like Facebook to be more lenient with their censorship policies.
So he sees it as a force for good, pushing back against what he perceives as censorship.
Yeah, exactly. His vision for X is to create, like, a true digital public square.
Where everyone can be heard, regardless of their political beliefs.
Yeah, he seems to believe that by empowering individuals to share information and challenge dominant narratives.
We can cultivate a more informed and engaged citizenry.
It's a pretty radical idea.
It is.
But he's not just talking about, online platforms.
Oh.
He proposes a pretty bold solution for addressing what he sees as, like, government inefficiency and overreach.
Okay, let's hear it.
The creation of a whole new government agency.
Whoa, hold on. He wants to create more government to fix government.
I know, right?
Ugh.
It sounds kind of counterintuitive.
It does. So what's this new agency supposed to do?
It would be called the Department of Government Efficiency.
Catchy.
I know, right?
Yeah.
And it would be entirely dedicated to, like, streamlining the federal bureaucracy, cutting wasteful spending, and making government operations more effective.
So basically a department solely focused on making the government work better.
Yeah, like cutting the fat,
Hmm.
making things run more smoothly. It sounds great in theory, but
But can you really overhaul something as massive and complex as the federal government without causing chaos?
that's the question, right?
Yeah.
I mean, Musk argues that the current federal bureaucracy is just, like, bloated and inefficient.
Filled with redundant agencies and unnecessary regulations.
Yeah, it's stuff that stifles innovation and wastes taxpayer dollars. So he proposes a thorough review of all government agencies.
With the goal of eliminating those that are outdated or not delivering value.
Exactly.
Yeah.
He even suggests offering, like, generous severance packages to government employees who are let go.
To ease the transition.
Yeah, like help them move into potentially more productive roles in the private sector.
Interesting.
His vision is to create, like, a leaner, more agile government
One that focuses on delivering essential services.
and empowers the private sector to drive economic growth.
It's a compelling argument, especially for those who felt bogged down by, bureaucratic red tape. But it's a very complex issue. No easy answers.
Totally. So what do you think? Is Musk's proposal a stroke of genius or a recipe for disaster? We'd love to hear your thoughts before we move on.
Yeah, it's a tough one for sure. I mean, it does sound good on paper.
Right, streamlining things,
Okay.
cutting waste. Who wouldn't want that?
Exactly. But like you said, it's a huge undertaking.
And that's exactly what, the critics of this plan point out.
Oh, yeah. What are they saying?
Well, they argue that it's, like, way too simplistic.
Okay.
That it ignores the complexities of how government actually works.
I can see that.
There's this concern that just eliminating agencies
Yeah.
could have all these unintended consequences.
Makes sense.
Because a lot of those agencies, they provide vital services.
Right. People rely on them.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's not as simple as just like getting rid of everything.
Definitely not.
But Musk seems to think the potential benefit.
Outweigh the risks.
Yeah, like we can't just keep doing things the same way.
Especially with the national debt and, the possibility of an economic downturn. It's like he's saying, we need to make some drastic changes.
Yeah, to adapt to the changing circumstances.
And his argument kind of boils down to this, right?
To what?
Like, do we want a bigger, more involved government?
That provides more services and regulations.
Or do we go for a smaller, more streamlined government?
That focuses on just the core functions.
And leaves more room for individual initiative and those free market solutions.
That's a big question, isn't it?
It's a fundamental question about the role of government in society.
And there's no easy answer.
But it's definitely something worth thinking about.
Especially given, all the challenges we're facing as a nation.
Totally. And that's what makes this whole conversation with Joe Rogan.
So fascinating.
Right. Elon Musk, whether you agree with him or not, he really challenges us
To think differently.
to question our assumptions and to, like, imagine those alternative possibilities for the future.
He's not afraid to shake things up.
No, he's definitely not afraid to challenge the status quo.
And even if you don't, buy into everything he says, he forces you to engage with those complex topics.
In a new way.
Exactly. That's the beauty of a deep dive like this.
What is it?
It's not about telling you what to think.
Right?
It's about giving you the context and insights to form your own informed opinions.
To reach your own conclusions.
Concise.
So as we wrap up this exploration of Elon Musk's mind-bending conversation with Joe Rogan, we want to leave you with this.
Okay.
What resonated with you the most?
Yeah.
What ideas challenged your thinking?
What are you going to explore further?
Because ultimately, the most valuable takeaway from a deep dive like this isn't the answers.
It's the questions.
The questions it inspires you to ask.